But I think it's going to be too hot. Seattle. Really?
All right, you guys ready? What do you guys think? Didn't you see this? Did everybody see the theme of this video?
No, sorry.
I'll play it again, but let's get rolling here. You guys got some big group dynamics going on here.
Do like the blue or the white.
All right, let's go. I'll play it once again. Let's go ahead and get rolling, you guys. I'm trying to make sure everybody understands I really don't hate cats. This is how it is right now. Literally, this video is how it is right now.
That's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
Hey, look, cat herding. And you guys, right there.
Not everyone can do what we do. I wouldn't do nothing else. It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and aim off to one of them, and feeling like it'll work.
All right. I feel the need to point out that I nailed it perfectly because we're watching a video about herding cats. I'm literally trying to herd those cats back there. That's the whole point of these silly videos. I get a little better at this teaching thing. All right, let's get back into some nasty grungy here because I know you guys are dying to. Oops. I lost my spot here. Let's get rolling. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so you remember how that interview went? The interview, I'm sorry, the encounter with that patient, even though it was a minor, it went horribly. And just in reality, that's kind of typical about how things are. Here's an encounter that actually is like your dream encounter if this ever happened. And again, this is a minor here. These are actors, obviously.
Hi, Olivia. I'm your clinician, Jen. I'm going to be taking care of you today.
Hi.
So, I see that you wanted to get treated for STIs and get some emergency contraception. Is that right?
Yeah.
And let's see, no known drug allergies, correct?
Right.
Okay, so we can work this all out today, no problem.
Good.
I do want to remind you that this conversation is private and confidential, unless you tell me that someone hurt or is hurting you, or if you have thoughts of suicide. Those things I need to report, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so why don't you tell me about wanting to be treated for STIs?
Well, I'm not sure if I have anything or not, so I wanted to get checked.
I'm really glad you came in. Normally we don't treat for STIs unless we've had a positive test result or your partner is tested positive.
Well, I don't know. And I won't know. So, can you please just treat me?
Why don't you tell me more about why you won't know?
I was at a party a couple days ago, and I don't know who he is.
Okay, well that happens. When I hear about parties and having sex with people you don't know, I worry that maybe that's something that happened and you didn't want it to. Did you agree to have sex with him?
I was kind of wasted.
Okay, so were you passed out?
I don't know. I woke up with my clothes off. So,
Olivia, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's never okay for someone to have sex with you without your consent, even if you've been drinking. So, I can go ahead and give you the medicine for the STIs in case you've been exposed. It's gonna be right here. And then this is the emergency contraception to prevent pregnancy. Also, I want you to come back in 3 months to test for HIV, just to make sure, okay?
Thank you.
So, Olivia, what happened to you at that party, someone having sex with you without your consent, it's not your fault. And it's a crime. I'm not an expert on sexual assault, but I work with these counselors at the local program, especially this woman, Jessica. She gets it. And she can go with you to the ER, get a specially trained nurse to keep.
No, I don't want anything like that. I'm 15. I was just stupid at a party. And I don't want to talk about it.
Okay, just so you know, you can talk to Jessica whether you decide to have the exam or not. Also, so this is the national hotline on the back of the car if you're bringing. They're open to talk to you 24/7. It's all confidential. And you know, they're really supportive and nice. So Olivia, do you remember when we talked earlier and I said that there were some things that I would need to report? This is one of those things.
What? No, you can't. I mean, I wasn't even supposed to be at this party. My parents don't know I was at this party. My boyfriend doesn't know I was at this party. You can't.
I know this isn't what you want, and I don't want to make this any harder or more stressful than it already is.
Don't.
Olivia, you do have some choices here. Okay, I have to make the report, but we can do it together. You know, you can sit in when I call it in, and I can put a note in the report about what you want to have happen, the safest way for your parents to be told, that kind of thing. But I do need to make the report whether you want me to or not, even whether I want to or not. So, what do you say?
You have to.
Yeah, I do.
Then I guess I want to hear the call.
Okay, so, remember the elements I was talking about? As far as how that visit went? So first of all, can we all agree that, you know, the shock and horror of finding out that she has to have that mandated reporting going on, that reaction from your patient is about as good as you could ever possibly imagine. It's like, well, I guess if you have to, I'll go ahead and go with it. Okay? And so I don't want to minimize that, but that would be nice if that's how it happens. But remember the previous video? That's more likely is where total freak out. But I just want to make sure they understand the concept of a mandated reporter. When you guys get your license in January, mandated reporter, you have legal obligations, and this is classic. So did everybody see that the whole gist of the video? One thing that I think is important to point out is that provider there, she was pretty clear. I just want to tell you as we get started that there are some things that even though we have a very confidential conversation, she's trying to establish rapport with her, you know, the way she approaches her patient. But she also was very clear saying, if I think you're, that you may hurt yourself, or if someone is hurting you, I'm mandated to report. And she said it a little different way, but that's pretty good. I mean, obviously you don't have to say it that way, but it really helps in making your patient feel like they can trust you. So she got the trust from her patient, and so that patient did disclose what happened, right? So just so everybody knows, she had to do it because of what? What's the overall factor of trying to make sure everybody understands? It's that magic number 18. That's a big deal, and that'll be on your test. The magic number 18. There's some magic numbers in nursing that I care about, like 10 millimeters on your 4R for PPD, lead levels of, I don't care about that anymore. 10 is another number for lead. I used to care about doses of, I can't remember the names anymore. Who cares about all that stuff, except some of the few magic numbers, the concept of being 18, that's a big, big deal. So that patient was 15, so there's no question what's going to happen, right? So just to finish up my little adult rants, let me just say, if that patient had been 21, what would the tail end of the video, how different would that have been? would she have been, her patient right there had been adamant that she doesn't want anyone to know, not her boyfriend, her parents, even though she's 21, her parents, anyone, she doesn't want anyone to know, would that nurse or that provider, I don't know if it's either probably nurse practitioner, would she still have said, oh, I'm still mandated to report? What do you guys think?
No.
Okay, but now you have someone who tells you that they just had, non-consensual sex, and she was raped by multiple people. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. But I just want to make sure everybody knows there's no mandatory reporting of that. And if your patient says no, 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 you'll get in huge trouble, and you could put that person in danger if you decide to go ahead for her own good and report. And I'm not trying to make light of this, I'm just saying, please remember the magic number is 18 and older. There's no mandatory reporting. In fact, you probably shouldn't. But I want to plead with everybody to say, please bring your sales pitch hard to your patient to say, but please, let's go ahead and report it because, and again, I don't want to get into it too much, but I just want to say my slant, if I ever have this conversation, I've had a few times, is to say, do you want that guy or those guys to get away with it again and again? That's the biggest sales pitch, I think, is you had a horrible experience and you want it to go away, but why would they stop doing it? This is your opportunity now, and ideally it's before they've taken a shower, removed evidence, they can go in and do things. And just to let everybody know, unless you've had way, way more extensive training than what you get from our program, don't be starting to whip out the rape kit and start doing any exam. You're gonna absolutely be referring this immediately in the ER setting if you can get them to consent to an exam. But that's the big deal. If they're over 18, we don't worry about that. But here's my segue though. If they're 17 or under, there's no question about what we're gonna be doing. I wanna make sure everybody's clear with this because this is important. The child abuse, every state has them, but you have to remember that they are mandated reporters. When 17 or under, when you suspect any type of non-consensual, forget about it, any type of illegal activity involving physical or sexual maltreatment, you have a duty to report. And let me try to get this right here. You have a duty to report if you're a licensed professional, and it spells it out here. And just so you know, right here it is: physician, nurse, resident, which is physician usually, intern, which is physician, coroners, school teachers, daycare personnel, social worker, or other person. And it doesn't say it in here, but here's a little rant, heads up for a soapbox here, unless you're a clergy. Idaho is one of the few states that says if you're clergy, and there's some specific definitions of what that is, you don't have to report. Everybody hear what I'm saying here? So here's what I used to do. I'll make a brief attempt at this to make my point, and I'll try to make it silly. I actually looked into this like 3 years ago. I thought, here's what I should do. I should try to form my own church, and then I have all you guys can be ordained ministers in my licensed church. This would have cost me money, which is why I blew it off. But if I could get you guys to be ordained ministers in my officially licensed church, and when I say church, that's really vague. I'm not picking on organized religion. Sometimes I do, but I shouldn't. But I'm saying, if I could get you guys to be ordained minister of the church, even as you're working as nurses, you wouldn't have to report it if you were part of what's called clergy by Idaho law. Everybody see where I'm going with this? I just want to pick on clergy because I'm setting up a whole rant about Catholic priests. I'm saying, oh, never mind. I don't want to give away my thunder. But does everybody understand what I'm saying though? You are mandated to report child maltreatment. And here's the fear part. I want to create fear, just like I was talking about earlier. You'll lose your license if you don't report it, and it turns out you knew it. Now, rarely do nurses ever get prosecuted for this because you don't necessarily, no one's going to document in their chart. You're going to say, you know what, I was really concerned about child abuse because of these bruises and these fractures and what the child told me, but I went ahead and did nothing. Now, if you put that in your actual EPIC file, you'll get in trouble, but nobody ever does that, right? People, they might suspect it, but they don't document it, therefore there's no way to prosecute it. So I'm not trying to say the reality is you're gonna lose your license if you don't report child abuse, but I'm saying you could because it's that important that you do report it. So back to that video, did you see that provider was very clear she had to report it even though the patient absolutely didn't want her to. So this is the tough thing about child abuse. This is one of the big challenges you'll face is nobody wants to report it because it's gonna create all sorts of issues. And that's one of the really horrible, traumatizing things about physical abuse and sexual assault in kids and adults is it's bad enough to be assaulted sexually or physically, but what's worse is when you have to report it and do something about it, it creates a shitstorm for the patient and the family. It really does. It's really horrible, but we have to do it, because if you don't do it, why would it stop? That's my big sales pitch, but I'll keep on with that. Got a question?
So, do you know what the Idaho laws are if someone's under 18, but they're having consensual sex with someone over 18?
You know what? Thank you. That's a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about this. So some of you guys were there yesterday when my group from Marsing did what I think may be the best presentation of all time. I don't want to minimize the other presentations that day, but
No, we agree.
just kidding. But okay, I forgot who it was. Maybe it was Jen or Angie. I don't know. When you guys said, early on, you guys were saying we had, identified some of the problems of Marsing. And please remember, I'm not picking on Marsing. I am not picking on Marsing. Marsing could be any place in America. But one of the problems that was identified, and I was there at the meeting when they said, and this comes from the principal, the high school principal, his name's Tim. He said this. He's like, well, we've noticed that there's some girls here in our high school who tend to be having relationships with some of these older guys. And he didn't really get into the details. I'll talk to him later about it. Essentially, guys are pulling up in their trucks. They graduated from Marsing 2, 3, 4 years ago, and they're picking up sophomore in high school and leaving, okay? And I didn't tell you guys this, and I don't mean to pick on her, but you guys probably didn't catch it, but Kathy was back. Kathy, she's back there. She raised her hand, she's like, whoa. And then she looked at me, she's like, that's illegal, what the hell? And that's why I'm like, oh, because of exactly what you're saying. You're saying, you're alluding to this thing of like, well, if an 8-year-old, or if a 4-year-old is engaging in sexual activity, that's a no-brainer. We're doing something about it. But there's a gray area, and it's not just with 17-year-old boy, 15-year-old girl. Imagine, like we're talking right here, 21, 22-year-old boy, 15, 16-year-old girl. Okay, so that's kind of what you're asking about. It's like, what do we do? Okay, so here's the textbook. Here's the prosecutor of the county here. Here's what I'm saying to you guys. If the child is 17 or under, we do something about it. Okay, I don't want to. I'm not saying this is how it is, but I'm saying the textbook version. Like if I give you a test question, or maybe you happen to see this on your NCLEX. I don't know how it would be on your NCLEX, but if you say, what should I do if I am sitting there and I have proof, I have a disclosure from the victim that I don't want to pick on girls because this could go either way. Like I'll pick on
Mary Kayla Turner.
Mary Kayla Turner. That's old school, but it's not uncommon for high school teachers who are female to prey on their son, or I'm sorry, their male, sophomore, juniors, maybe even seniors in high school. Okay, don't be thinking that doesn't happen. That happens a lot, maybe even as much as male, female, female, male relationships. But essentially, the answer to your question is, as a licensed professional, someone under 17 is having sex, and you have, when I say evidence, it's really disclosure. If you're witnessing, like if you come into if you're at the school, you're the school nurse, and you open up the broom closet, and there's 2 kids going at it right there, deal with it, but legally, you have to report it. And I guarantee you, if that scenario happens, that you witness sexual activity on school grounds, you absolutely have to involve, at the minimum, the principal, the superintendent, and have them, essentially you're punting it up the way where someone's going to be calling and dealing with it. But that's what you're supposed to do. Everybody hear me say that? That's the test question answer. But the reality is, just like my group saw in Marsing, the reality is, it's going on, but you're not seeing it. Like, and I'll just pick on this guy. I know Tim pretty well, and Tim will say, if he was walking in the parking lot and he saw a 22-year-old having sex with a 14-year or 15-year-old girl in the back of the truck or in the station wagon or something, he would do something about it. And he definitely would call local law enforcement, or at least the resource officer, who would make sure that there was reports, parents notified, and all the T's crossed and the I's dotted and that thing. But as far as the vagueness of, well, we know they have a relationship, you don't really know they're having sex. But let's get real. But again, we don't know. Maybe there's non-sexual activity. They just have a relationship and they're dating, but they haven't gone all the way, or whatever they phrase it. It's a vague area, and so as far as actually reporting that's tricky. And then there's, as far as like when do kids in high school start having sex with each other? everyone knows what's going on. You know, and you get just as you know, the vast majority of kids still, I try to read these things, but the vast majority of children in high school have engaged in sexual activity prior to graduation. Does that mean that as soon as you find out you have to call? It doesn't, except if you're the person who's in charge of them, the school nurse, or you have responsibility for them, you have policies and laws that you have to follow. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You said under 17 though? Would it be under 18?
17 or under, I mean 17 or under, you gotta do something about it legally. But I don't want you guys to think that, if I were to sit there and say, any time you hear about or witness any sexual activity of 17 and under, you have to call someone. I don't want to be naive to say that there's this gray area. And then, I think the students who went out to Marsing and heard what the principal said about their concerns for relationships of alumni of the high school dating current students in the high school, that's a very legitimate concern. As far as, do they have to make the call? That's where it gets gray, because they're not witnessing the actual sex. And as far as, but let me back up and say, there's also this issue about consent. If someone were to say, oh, well, the 14-year-old consented to the 17-year-old to have the sex, that doesn't matter because she's 14, she's a minor. And there are many cases where minors, 17, 16-year-olds actually do jail time for engaging in sex. Why can't I remember the term of this?
Statutory?
Statutory, that's right. Statutory rape is the term. Sometimes that's in actual laws, state by state, but statutory rape is just a gray area. But I just wanted to make sure, like, essentially to wrap this up is to say, you're the licensed professional. If in doubt, call. So if you have this gray area where it's very clear that there's been a 17-year-old with a 15-year-old engaging in sexual activity, if you're in doubt, call CPS. Call, So let me just give you guys a heads up. The answer to about 3 questions next week is going to be call CPS. I'm going to say right now, call CPS. I want you guys to always call, because one of the big mantras I want you guys to understand, and I'm just going to fast move on here, is if you guys are ever in doubt, you'll never get in trouble for calling CPS. Your boss might get mad at you, but that's something you have to deal with. You'll never get in trouble for calling CPS. The parents might be mad, but you won't get in trouble. And I'll get into that in a second. But one thing I want to point out here is in Idaho, as well as I want to say it's up to like 28 or maybe 30 states, there actually is a law in Idaho, and in Idaho they call it attempted strangulation, but different states have different verbiage on it. But I just want everybody to know, if you have the documentation of the strangulation, but, and this is the key, you don't have the actual victim's testimony in court, you don't, maybe the victim doesn't even want to prosecute the offender, but you, the healthcare team, the physician, the nurse, you've done a really good job of documenting this actual strangulation, all the things that are in this pamphlet that I posted. That's going to be enough evidence to get a felony conviction of attempted strangulation, which is going to be up to 15 years, okay? And that may sound silly if you're thinking, well, why the heck would you convict somebody of doing something where the actual victim of the crime doesn't actually want them to be prosecuted or doesn't assist with the investigation or the testimony? You ever see where we're going with this? Why would that be the case? And that case is, strangulation is so freaking lethal, it's so horrible that states are enacting laws to make sure that you get that guy in jail, even if the victim won't cooperate, because of all the dynamics of IPV I went through. I hope that makes sense to everybody. But this is where I'm saying, you don't necessarily call the cops when you see strangulation, but you document the shit out of that interaction, because you could assist in getting that guy thrown in jail, and therefore you actually are protecting the victim. And this may sound trite, and I don't mean it to say, but I'm going to summarize my thought by saying, to help her, protect her from herself. Everybody see what I'm going to say? Because she won't leave him, you have to step in and document your ass off so you can help the prosecutor make the case to get that guy in jail. You're protecting her from herself. I'm not trying to put her in a bad spot. I'm trying to tell you guys, it's that she's that scared of dying that she won't cooperate. But once that guy gets thrown in jail, I'd like to say that she'll come find you and say, oh, thank you, but don't kid yourself. That doesn't happen with any of your patients for anything that happens, okay? You guys don't get into nursing for accolades from your patients. Please, don't be doing it for those reasons. Do it for the money. All right, let's talk about child abuse. It's way more fun. So, I want to talk about specific things that we need to know. Then I want to have a couple little rants about the future of child abuse, and then I'm going to wrap it up. And I also want, I just want to remind everybody, we're going to get to the end. We're going to do some things and watch a couple of videos. But before I forget, we've got to do the survey of 345. Okay, I asked Jen to help me with this, but I'm going to wrap up this after we finish this. Hopefully in the next 30-40 minutes, we're going to finish up what I'm talking about, so you got to be totally prepped for your exam next week and for your careers as nurses. But then I'm going to wrap it up. But don't everybody like get up and leave, because you spend at least 10 minutes doing these surveys, or I will get in so much trouble if I don't get these done. You cannot imagine how much trouble. I literally could get fired if you guys don't stay and fill these surveys out. So don't me just say, okay, see you later, and everybody leave, and I say, oh shit, I forgot the survey. Don't let me do that, please. All right, so here's the nuts and bolts of child abuse. I don't think I need to try to generate empathy from you guys on kids who are victims of maltreatment. But just remember, maltreatment is physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse is a great area, and neglect. Okay, so I actually yanked a bunch of slides off this older presentation for this, and I took a bunch of boring stats out there, but I just want to make sure everybody knows, when it comes to child abuse, hear these words, it's neglect. So physical abuse, again, we're going to talk about bruising and identifying things, because this is the nuts and bolts of you guys, is identifying physical abuse, and maybe a little sexual abuse, but physical abuse, that's the key for your careers the next few years, is catching physical abuse. But please remember that the biggest form of child maltreatment is neglect. Neglect is way harder to catch, and it's way harder to diagnose. However, without getting too much into it, I didn't create a bunch of slides for this, but without getting too much into it, there is a growing amount of medical neglect. Medical neglect being, this is my definition of parents who just can't keep up with all the technology required to keep their kids alive or healthy. Trachs, G-tube midnight or nighttime feedings, TPN infusions because of their short bowel syndrome. All these technical things that we never dealt with 10, 15, 20 years ago. There's a growing population of technology-dependent children for their health care. Okay, I don't have to tell you guys that. I know you guys know that. But there's also a just as growing number of parents who just can't keep up and can't get it done. And that's a big social problem. Social workers are dealing with all the time. Social workers are ill-prepared, at least in Idaho, in my opinion. Don't tell them I told you this. Oh, I shouldn't say that out loud. But they're ill-prepared to deal with health issues. However, nurses are prepared to deal with health issues. So what I'm saying is the amount of medical neglect is growing. And if there's one thing you guys are going to be dealing with more is medical neglect. The key is identifying it. And just, the answer on the test is they're not gaining weight. Guys, I'm oversimplifying it massively, but either they're not breathing, but they won't show up in the ER not breathing, they'll already be dead. But if they're not gaining weight, red flag if they're technology dependent. Therefore, that could be leading to the CPS call on neglect. That's my summary of neglect. Even though it's the most prevalent form, you guys, on a day-to-day basis won't deal with it nearly as much as physical abuse. So bruising, that's what you're going to looking for. The mysterious bruise, that's the classic presentation. So the key to knowing if it's an appropriate bruise or not, it's all about development. So you guys are all experts in growth and development, because I know you took growth and development. Some of you guys like it so much you took it twice. Oh, no, just kidding. Some of you guys are parents, so that does give you a huge advantage on knowing when should babies be crawling, cruising. Cruising means they're letting go of stuff and falling around, or actually walking, but it's a rough walk for a while. But kids fall down. Everybody, that's not surprise to people. Kids fall down. So if a kid falls down and a kid has a bruise, should you call CPS? It's all about the context. And everybody, this is probably the most important statement I'm going to make this whole morning, is this. What's going on as far as what the parents tell you, the history. What's going on with the situation as to why we see the symptoms. Everybody hear these words. The history plus your physical makes sense? Sounds good to me? Based on my knowledge of growth and development and what's physically possible and the laws of physics were not violated, versus the history that I hear plus the physical exam doesn't seem to make sense. How in the world did you generate enough pressure on that clavicle, humerus, fibula to generate that type of fracture, comminuted spiral, multiple fracture? If it doesn't make sense, that's a red flag, and that's when you're reaching for the phone and call. Now you don't call 911, you call CPS number. I don't know if I have that on slides. You guys can look it up. Everybody see what I'm saying with that? History plus physical either makes sense or doesn't. You really need to know about growth and development if you're working with kids, and you really need to, have a pretty good shit detector if you're looking at the parents, Now, I'm kind of making a joke, but not really. All right, so where do you think infants would get bruises? I'm sorry, not infants. Where would an infant get a bruise? 6-month-old, where are they going to bruise? The only bruise they should have is this bruise in the back of their head because they're laying in the car seat too much. Should you call CPS? Maybe. If their head is that flat and they have no hair growing, worse than me, but if they have no hair growing in the back and their head is literally getting flat, and maybe they even have some sacral pressure ulcers, the parents could be that big of a slacker. I'm saying that they're not lazy, they're probably just high on something all the time, and therefore that baby really is being neglected. So don't think that just because an infant, I'm not saying bruised, but has something going on, it could happen. But infants in general shouldn't have any bruises. But then infants start crawling around and moving. Well, then they should have, bruises, but it should be in specific spots. And so in general, forehead and the shins up here may be falling down from other things, but they don't fall on their butt. Infants don't just suddenly like, oh, I'm gonna fall, oops, get ready, boom, land on my butt. They don't do that. Adults do that, but infants don't do that. So if they're not out of the car seat, if they're not out of the crib, they shouldn't have bruises, okay? That's lesson number 1. I don't think that's a surprise to you guys. You guys know that. There's a basic thing, yet another acronym to learn in nursing. Don't memorize this if you don't, it's not a big deal, but you guys know your assessment of any kind of thing is what's the color, location, don't worry. Size and shape, and is there a pattern? This is the big deal, is the pattern. Trying to be, this is where you go into CSI mode, trying to think what caused that. I got some pictures waiting for it, okay? And this is the big deal. Here's instead of making a long rant of this, just remember this. You suspect it and you're not sure. And everybody hear this. I want to explain something for you guys who decide to stay here in the valley and take everyone else's job. I'm just kidding. There's plenty of jobs for you. Stay here in the valley. Here's how it works. You think, uh-oh, I'm worried about this. Let's call CPS. Okay? Maybe they'll come right then, but probably not. But maybe they'll come right then. But in general, if there's a determination that maybe there's something going on, CPS will immediately get the right people. Let me say it again. The right people need to come. Ideally, every community in America has a forensic team, adult and pediatric. Some people call it SANE team, SART team. There's all these acronyms. Sexual assault nurse examiners, adult and PD, different types. There's actually, let me just tell you that here in this valley, there's an entity called CARES, Division of the St. Louis Children's Hospital. Physician and 2 nurse practitioners, 3 people, 3 full-time providers, as well as at least 8 or 10 support staff. All they do is abuse, and they excel at sexual abuse, but they have all this stuff going on. So when I say take photos if possible, go ahead and do it if you feel like it's important enough to do. I'm not discouraging you to do that, but don't even think that your photos will go to court and there'll be a prosecution. If you suspect child abuse, call CPS. That's all you have to know, is call CPS. But once CPS is called, there's a whole bunch of things that happen. The specialists come in and they take the right photos, and as you can imagine, time is important. Don't say, hey, we'll see that kid in a week. Ideally, it's going to be that day, but again, sometimes there's a volume thing, and sometimes pedophiles are getting paid overtime and they work really hard on a weekend and you don't get them all evaluated. Did we catch that joke? A little pedophile joke here? Not funny, okay. But when I say take photos, what I really say is call CPS so that they can contact the right people. That's something, but you guys don't need to learn about everything you need to know. But when they take photos, there's really no need to have a ruler here, but rulers are important, you'll see in a second. But when you see like bruising to the face, okay, just remember this. Instead of, I hope you're horrified by this, but just remember this. You see some bruises, this is where you have to think, what's the story behind this bruise, okay? So if we see something, and I'll point this out, different discolorations, but somehow this is on the whole head. I can't really, I don't know if I can disseminate where all the edges of this bruise are, but we're wondering, I'll stereotype this. Let's say someone says, you know what, he was riding his scooter and he fell. Okay, was he wearing a helmet? And they say, oh, yes he was. Well, okay, no he wasn't, because helmets have straps, okay? That's just, don't worry about all the details, just know that we need to figure out what caused this. And I think most of you guys can agree that what caused this is something came down on the side of his face, probably someone's hand. If there were like some lines up here, like maybe where fingers hit, that would be even better. But someone obviously is taking, this is a whole picture, but someone took a picture of this but this has got to, this needs to have a really good explanation if this is in the ER or at, you know, you're the school nurse and this happened. If this happened, if someone comes in and says, I like, this boy just fell in the playground, look at this. This is not something that just happened. This happened a day or two ago. As far as determining the age of a bruise, don't ever even try to get into that. There's literally books and there's whole websites dedicated to ages of bruises. Okay, so now you look, you see this, you're like, and you're examining your, just like a toddler probably. And you're examining your toddler, you're thinking, here's a classic question to the parent standing right there. What's going on here? What's this? Tell me more about what you think or what this is, okay? Now, don't worry too much about being investigative as far as like documenting the exact reaction, exactly what the parent or the caregiver says at this moment. But this is, again, this is gonna require something. Now, like right now, if someone said, oh, we have a cat, and they jump up and scratch him, they're all fine, because cats are evil. Cats are horrible. So this isn't a cat though, right? You guys can tell, this isn't a cat. These are patterns. You see the angle here? I'm gonna try to draw the angle. I don't know why these things are there, that's weird. But you see the angle here? This is probably an extension cord or a belt or something. The same angle was hit, okay? This is a classic presentation. Again, it's pattern. That's the concept here is the pattern of the injury. Patterned bruises, patterned cuts, like patterned abrasions, the fancy word. That's what we need to be looking for on our kids. When there's an impact to the head, kids will fall and get a bruise, but when their ear is involved, a good nurse will be looking if they say, oh look, they have an injury, or like somebody comes in and they say, he fell off his bike, we were just in a car wreck, blah, blah. Look behind the ears. Just because there's a bruise behind the ear doesn't mean that it's child abuse, but it means that there was a significant impact that hit the ear, and not only did it hit the ear, it could damage this pinna here, but it actually could bruise behind the ear. That's a significant trauma. Again, I'm not saying it's child abuse, but head trauma, that's a big deal. Having a trauma to the head, if anything, there's bruising behind the ear, we're doing a CT, we're gonna be doing diagnostic tests to rule out major injuries. We don't want this kid going home and dying because of a subdural bleed that was undiagnosed in the ER. So bruising behind the ear is just remember, it's significant, but again, what's the history? You gotta know what exactly caused this, because that's very significant. That's just not, you know, falling off your bike with a helmet, or maybe even no helmet, okay? There's more to it than that. So now, there's also bruises. This is actually, this is from a case study, I can't remember the details, but I want to point out a couple things. You see these bruises here on the leg? How big is a person's hand, okay? If you start working with kids like this, you'll see that there's clearly, deep fingers rooted in this, and then you see this ruler here. This is a good picture with a ruler. I think there's no point in taking pictures of anything on a child if you're looking at potential evidence for a court case without a ruler in the picture. Just again, I'm not trying to teach you guys how to do this. Just saying, if you want to take pictures, that's fine. But if you don't have things like eyes or hands and feet in the picture, you gotta have this is adult hand, but don't assume that there's what's the word I'm looking at? The scale. There's not scale there. See, no ruler here. That's not a good picture. Anyway, that's pretty obvious what's going on here. Okay, so the location's a big deal, the patterns, and then if this multiple areas, like it's not a bruise here, but it's also a bruise there and a bruise there, it's always got to be about what's going on, what's the history. That's the key to everything, especially probably 3 or 4 questions on your test next week. But you got to be able to put that together. So let's go through a few case studies. This won't take long, but I just want to make my point here. These are actual, and by the way, these are actual real case studies from from the files of St. Luke's Children's Hospital. We'll go through them. 3-month-old male. Dad pulls the infant, according to Dad, he pulls the infant away from the pillow, and then the child started to cry. And then Dad saw that it was swelling, so Dad brought him in. Oh, by the way, there's this dog hanging out who looked guilty. Sounds like a good story. Everybody got that? Okay. I know I'm being real cynical here, but. So anyway, they go to the ER, and normal head CT, but then there was a skeletal survey. Does anybody know what a skeletal survey is? After you guys graduate, you're not going to be in charge of ordering a skeletal survey, but just so everybody knows, if there's suspected child abuse, if there's bruising or red flag assessment data that's coming in, the provider there really should perform a skeletal survey. That essentially is an x-ray of the whole body. That's just so you guys know that. And that really helps in not only diagnosing a problem that you could literally save that kid's life if you do the survey, but we're also always looking for, and remember this, old fractures. Remember that concept. If there's some old or healing fractures, that's another big deal. So the dad yanks on the leg and you do this, the x-ray. Remember what's the name of this bone right here?
Oh,
It's the femur. Remember femur. How old is this kid? 3 months.
Jesus.
So that dad is probably giving Schwarzenegger a run for the money as far as being incredibly strong, because that's a serious amount of force that it takes to yank it. But here's my point though. Somebody yanked it and did this. So people can snap bones, especially when they're angry. Okay, angry people can do a lot of bad things. But anyway, don't worry about reading x-rays, but just know that that's pretty abnormal. You guys know that. Okay. So then when that x-ray comes in, they're like, oh man, that's a pretty bad fracture. What do you think happened, Dad? And he's like, oh, it's the dog. It must be the dog. Okay. So since the dog was hiding, it must be the dog. And then when Dad pulled the baby away, maybe the dad caused it, but maybe the dog actually caused that broken femur. Except, again, this isn't the nurse. And just remember, this is an important thing I want to make sure everybody knows. The nurse is not the police officer, okay? The nurse identifies things and makes the call. In the NCLEX world, and for my test next week, the nurse identifies what's going on and decides to call CPS yes or no. That's all I want you guys to know and do. But the nurse doesn't drag the potential abuser into the room with the double mirror where you can see in and you can't see out. And the nurse doesn't figure out which nurse is going to be good cop and bad cop. And the nurse doesn't try to make the suspect pee in their pants while they handcuffed to the chair. That's for the Canyon County sheriffs and Ada County, and the Boise PD guys to do. Okay, and male, female. That didn't generate much laughter either. Sorry. All right. So anyway, after being questioned, not by the nurses, everybody hear me say that? Not by the nurses, but by the law enforcement, the specially trained law enforcement officers that arrived at the scene. The dad did admit that he got mad and did that. So when they changed their story, first it was me yanked him, then it was, oh, well, maybe it wasn't me, maybe it was the dog. That's one of the red flags. And please, I doubt to say this to you, but I just feel the need to say it. Don't think that parents are not capable of doing bad things, okay? And that may seem, I hope there's no one's naive enough to think that, well, mom would never hurt their child. I don't mean to be cynical and pessimistic, but I'm sorry, but please trust me. Any human being is capable of horrible, horrible things. Not everybody in here is Jeffrey Dahmer, but everybody has their breaking point. You guys remember my little rant about colic, okay? Colic is the source of child abuse as well. It doesn't mean that person's a bad person. This may sound weird, but not all child abusers are horrible people, but people do things that you can't understand, and it's all about protecting the kids from further harm. Because if somebody does something to somebody, whether they're their parent or not, just because they say they're sorry doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing exactly what happened before. I could go on and on about that, but I don't want to generate too much sympathy for child abuse in this class. That's for us. That's for an elective later on. All right. Case number 2 is an 8-year-old female. Okay, this is important. I need to make a serious point about this one. She had bruising on January 27th, and then she also had a well child visit scheduled a week later, but went to the ER instead because of the bruising. That's kind of weird, but that's what happened. And then she 8-year-old may have fallen off the bike. Went to the ER, head CT, and the skeletal survey were normal, okay? So no head trauma or significant head trauma that caused any bleeds or any fractures, current or old healing. But however, the history wasn't consistent with what the bruises looked like. So the nurses called CPS, and after CPS was called, they put the actual 8-year-old and their younger sibling, they put them in foster care because there was a safety issue because of this mysterious bruising. They went to CARES. Again, CARES is the name of that specialty unit, forensic unit that the St. Luke's Children's Hospital runs. They really should be consulted on any suspected case of child maltreatment. I used to say just physical or sexual abuse, but they've expanded their services in the last 2 years where it's pretty much everything. Even underweight kids, they really get involved in it because they've increased their staff. So they had lots of bruises at various locations, and many of them were in unusual places, okay? So, let me think here. So here's the actual kid. This is a real case here. So you've got bruising in the frenulum here. That's weird. How did that happen? And then look at this, there's this bruises on the lower lip. So so in your mind you're thinking, well, what causes this? What kind of physical violence, what kind of hitting causes this? Now right here, you got this kind of vague bruising right here in the sacral area, but also this is the hamstring area. This is the posterior, probably right leg. See some bruises here. What's going on? Some wrestling tournaments going on. They got crazy. Maybe maybe these teeth were bit down, but maybe there was an impact. So we're thinking about what's going on here, right? And then look, bruising on the ankle, and then look, looks like, I bet you this is their left leg and the inner area of the left leg. See bruises here and here. And look, this is behind the ear bruise. Remember I mentioned that before? What do you guys think's going on here?
The baby's being beaten.
But there's no fractures. No, but here, okay, now just let's do a little CSI here. So you guys remember we're going to have a little hematology on next week. White blood cell count 7.5. What's that? Normal, abnormal? Oh, everybody's worried. Oh my God, we have to know these. If I ask you about this on the test, I'll tell you if it's normal or not. And just so you guys know, 7.5 is totally normal. Hemoglobin and hematocrit. Remember this? 1442. Is that normal or abnormal? Are they anemic?
No.
No, that's normal. Don't worry about being too much. H&H, if it's too much, that's a long story. Coagulations, there's no bleeding disorder. They don't have hemophilia or something. Remember, you guys need to know about factor VIII deficiency for the test, but there's literally millions of, well actually a million, but there's hundreds and hundreds of anemias there. But that could explain some bruising, right? Some kind of anemia, but they don't have any kind of factor issue. But look at their platelet count. Oh. The parents need to go to jail because they have not been administering enough platelets to their child. Oh, everybody see what's going on here? What's going on? Remember, what's the condition when you don't have enough platelets? Thrombocytopenia. Remember, I think I mentioned this in class. Idiopathic thrombocytopenia, although it's not called idiopathic anymore. It's called the other I. Immune. Okay, immune thrombocytopenia. Remember ITP? Was that on the blueprint?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's ITP? Their bone marrow is not producing platelets. What would be the #1 sign of low platelets? Bleeding. So prior to getting a lab, they have bleeding or they have bruising, mysterious bruising. Oh, what's going on here? So we've actually helped this family diagnose idiopathic thrombocytopenia, which is this happened. I want to say this is 4 years ago. Here's a little trivia here. The irony of this is I was actually trying to get the slides in order yesterday, and then I told some of you guys I had to go to my son's track meet, and that's why my head's all sunburned. Can you guys tell? I didn't have a hat. When you guys lose your hair, just carry a hat with you in your car at all times. Because suddenly you agreed to volunteer for something, and you're like, oh shit, I got to stand in the sun for 4 hours and I have a hat, and I want to go over to the Dairy Queen, so I want to wear all the stupid Dairy Queen hats. So I actually stood in the sun. But here's my point. While I'm sitting there volunteering my son's track meet, timing for all the races, and I'm trying to focus on my ADHD doctor, I'm trying to watch the guy start so I can get the right time. I look across the track, and there's the actual oncologist, hematologist, who worked on this very case that I've been trying to get my slides in order from. I forgot his last name. His name's Nathan. You guys know, he's over there. I see him all the time. But anyway, he was the one. I saw him yesterday who actually did this case, and he's the one who actually diagnosed the ITP after the CPS referral. Everybody got that? So, did the parents need to go to jail for this?
No.
Okay. But now ask yourself this question. When the kids came back home, do you think the parents went over to CARE and said, thank you so much for diagnosing that ITP. We're so happy that we lost our kids for a whole week and they had to be in foster care. I don't know. I'm just making this up. I don't know how their reaction was. But this is one of the tough things about working in child welfare is even the parents who didn't abuse their kids still hate you for calling CPS, okay? But again, my sales pitch to you is, wouldn't it have been horrible if this kid actually had been abused and didn't, didn't get protected? But in this case, the child wasn't a victim of abuse. But even though you made the call to CPS, whoever did this literally helped diagnose this ITP. Who knows how long that might have gone on without a diagnosis. Everybody see my point here? So just get ready to grow some thick skin if you want to help kids, because you got to have thick skin and you got to figure out a way to motivate yourself, even though the parents are bitching at you for calling CPS. work on that one too. All right, so, and there was this thing about language barrier. I forgot exactly what language they spoke, but bleeding disorders, we talked all about that last week, but often, bleeding disorders are often diagnosed after a call to CPS. I'll just say that because of the bruising issue. Okay, last case here, 10-month-old female. Father was picking up the child as she rolled away from him. How old is the kid? 10 months, so not really walking yet, maybe starting to walk, but she was rolling away, and then when he grabbed her leg, there was a pop of the leg. Could happen, right? But mom even heard it from the other room. That's a pretty loud pop. But after that pop, she didn't want to move her leg and cries every time you move it, so something's wrong. So good for them for coming to the ER. And here's some history right here. They live with the parents. But here's a red flag, just so you know this. For whatever reason, I don't know how this happened, but someone looked at their charts and there currently was an open case with CPS of a sibling of this other kid. Red flag there. I'm not saying you have to call CPS because there's another sibling who's under investigation because of a previous complaint, but please, that's when suddenly history compared to your exam becomes really important if there's previous interaction with Idaho Health and Welfare. They call them FACS, Family and Child Services, or Family and Community Services is their official name. So, no other health problems for this kid. And there's a physical exam that was normal except for the swelling of the right thigh. After that pop, that would certainly make sense. But then luckily there was a skeletal survey done, right? And here's the pop right here. Again, it's that femur again. Ouch. Broken femurs are a bummer. So this is, but here's my point on this case. This is not necessarily abuse because it may sound like, oh my gosh, how could they abuse their kid? You know, a broken bone doesn't mean a parent needs to go to jail because things happen. And just because somebody did something and it caused an injury, that doesn't mean they were doing it maliciously. I want to make sure everybody understands that. I'm not trying to be the call CPS before you even like have them sign the consent kind of a nurse instructor. I'm not that kind of person. I'm saying listen to the history, but then the history makes sense here. I would, you know, if you saw this, there's still no real need to call CPS except for that previous encounter. There's another child who's under investigation, so that would make me think a little twice about it. But in this case, he had a skeletal survey. Like I said, that's a total body X-ray, and so you see that fracture. But look at this. There's a healing fracture of the ribs. Okay. Again, you guys don't need to be looking at X-rays and making this. This isn't. I'm not trying to convince you guys that you have to do this come January. But after you go to NP school, you need to get in on this. Okay. You need to be able to say, hey, that's abnormal, and then while you're in clinical, you just go to whatever provider you're working with and say, I'm not sure if I am seeing what I think I'm seeing here. And then that provider, who hopefully has a lot of experience, will say, oh man, that's not why they're here. They're here for their broken left, or maybe the right femur, but we have a healing fracture of the rib. Oh, look at this. This is bucket. Don't worry about what a bucket fracture is other than it's common in kids, except it's difficult to do, and if this is a healing bucket fracture, there's got to be explanation for this, but there weren't. In this case, there weren't any. So before you go and call CPS, you might want to say, hey, what's going on with this fractured rib and a fracture? The other leg, the tibia of the other leg has a healing fracture as well around the growth plate. That's actually pretty significant where this fracture is. You guys seeing this? You know, the next step would be, and this wouldn't necessarily be you, the nurse, especially fresh out of school, this would be the provider in the ER to go have a little chat with the family about what they found. And again, it's all about what they say. But it's pretty unlikely you're not going to be calling CPS on this. But does everybody see why it's important to just look at all the factors? It all comes down to, does the history you're hearing match up with what you're seeing? And not just what you're seeing now, but what the skeletal survey, or what your labs, your x-rays, it's all part of the big picture. But Dad admits that he yanked the right leg out of anger and then never figured out what happened the other way. But obviously there's a safety concern, and this is where someone, CPS needs to follow their protocol and make sure that those kids are protected, and there's probably more than one kid in there, all right? So that's what I'm gonna talk about with these cases. So let's go to the next in-class exercise, so whip out your answer sheets. So which of the following signs seen in a toddler should warrant the further assessment from the nurse? So you see a bruise on the anterior, which is the fancy word for front of the shin in a toddler. Significant diaper rash. A girl toddler who wears very masculine clothing. Okay, so now you're thinking these answers all suck. Which will I pick? Okay, so I want you to, again, like I do almost every week, don't worry about getting the right answer here because this is a stupid question. But I'm trying to generate your thought to think, well, bruising is a big deal, but it's pretty normal to have bruising on the front of the shins of a toddler. Can we all agree on that? So A is not really a good answer. But diaper rash, would I call CPS for bad diaper rash?
Yeah, it means they're not changing the baby. They're not caring.
Depends how bad it is.
It depends on how bad it is, but let me just say this. If I, this is a bad question, so I'm not saying, please don't think that, oh my God, I have to answer this question next week. But this is a bad question where there really isn't a good answer. Obviously C is just, I'm just being silly. Although I don't want to get into that because then you guys really hate me. But if you have significant diaper rash, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to call CPS. And I would argue that if that's an assessment finding, you really need to start cranking up your history questions. This is not just going to be a normal 20-minute, well, child, let's get him out of here because we're busy and I want to get home by 5 because MacGyver's on. But everybody remember MacGyver, an old show I used to watch when I was younger?
Yeah,
but something, let's say Gilligan's Island's on. Something good on TV is waiting for me. I want to get out of this clinic because I'm tired of working all day. So I'm going to hustle this kid out of here. But if there's really bad something, in this case, diaper dermatitis, we really need to know what's going on. If anything, teach that parent how to change a freaking diaper. But diaper rash can get a CPS call if it's bad enough, but usually there's going to be some other factor going on. And if you open up the door of all these social ills, you can easily say, well, this is a social work problem. Yes, maybe it is, except no, you're a slacker if you don't deal with it. But CPS isn't always the answer, but diaper rash, as benign as you might think it is, can actually be the initial red flag into a much bigger issue, and we're heading into that neglect thing. Maybe this may not be physical abuse, but neglect, like sitting in a dirty diaper all the time, that's a big deal. All right, let's talk about some specific things that you guys need to know for your test, or for your NCLEX. Mongolian spots, very tied to ethnic history. The ethnicity of your patient is a big deal as far as Mongolian spots, but Mongolian spots are almost always on the posterior, around the sacral or back area. They're not really birthmarks. Technically they are, but they're there. They've been there since birth, and oftentimes as kids get older, parents actually get tired of trying to tell healthcare providers that yes, there's a Mongolian spot there. I'm not saying you guys have to be able to differentiate this, but they're usually pretty easy to tell. But again, it's all about the history. If they've always had